So this is one of our keynote panels to start off the conference. And we just heard just the tip of the iceberg about the United States and some of the issues that are going on and some of the opportunities that are going on for 5G. This is the Regulatory and Spectrum panel, and it is titled The Progress of 5G Spectrum and Regulatory Policy. What we're going to do is have very short presentations or prepared remarks. And that will be followed by an interactive session of seed questions from me as well as the audience going forward. And I think you'll each need, if some of you have slides, so we'll need to make sure that you have okay. And could we show the slides on the monitor down below, please? You can start without? Okay, I think they're going to look at the connection. And this is Dr. Peter Stuckmann. He's head of unit Future Connectivity Systems for the European Union.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to be here. The event here in the US, I think, is timely. We are seeing, as the title of the seminar says, 5G at the horizon. And a good occasion to look at the status and the progress, also from the public policy perspective, which this session is about, and I'm pleased to do this for the European perspective. So, yeah, slides are on. So just to give the main policy context, as already said by Chris in the opening remarks, we very much underline that there is a number of societal challenges behind 5G and also socioeconomic challenges and opportunities. Of course, we will, from a public side, why are we interested in 5G, why we're looking at this so closely? Well, we need 5G, not for the sector, but for also the economy at large. So it's about growth and jobs at the end of the day. We see the transformation of the industries, we call it digital transformation, and we believe that 5G will be one of the building blocks and the main enabler of that. So here you see some illustrations which areas are concerned, mainly energy, transportation, automotive, production, health, media, entertainment, and many more. So we call this the vertical, so we will see, of course, the continuation of the success of 4G, providing services to consumers and businesses, to provide connectivity services there. But in 5G, we have the opportunity to move into specialized services for vertical industries. And there are a number of interesting studies done on that, looking at the opportunities of that. For ICT players, growth rates also for the telecom sector of around 30%, only looking at the 5G enabling digital industry transformation opportunities. So in the context of the 5G PPP, so the research program of the Union, we looked at this quite early, and the 5G PPP brought out this brochure which you might have a look at. It's already now a couple of years time, but still very relevant, a bit more in-depth looking at what are the different opportunities in different vertical industries. And this leads now to the trial strategy that the partnership has adopted recently. So just as framing, what are the opportunities? Now, that is the reason why 5G is at the heart of the DSM strategy of the Union. And following on the main digital single market strategy adopted a couple of years ago, in 2016 we adopted the 5G action plan, looking specifically on 5G, what are the main elements and the timing and milestones we want to look at. So one immediate one, start as early as possible with 2020 for the commercial launch, very important. You called it a race this morning. I mean, at the end of the day, it's on cooperation, and it's this global but we're all doing our best for our economies to be the first, to be early. So that's very important. So commercial launch, and we have the challenge in Europe that we have, it's quite fragmented market, so key is here to be ready in all member states, like one city per member state at least, to have this early commercial launch. But then looking ahead, also in the view of these vertical strategies, we defined a target for 2025 to have all urban areas and especially main transport path connected with 5G. So that's a political target, and we facilitating, this is at the end is a private agenda because the investment will be private sector, but we're facilitating partnerships and the path to come to this target. So behind this action plan, these are the objectives, are a number of elements that are, of course, we're looking into private sector engagement necessary, public sector. So we have standards policy on the private side, the trials, and then on the public side, as in the introduction has become clear, the spectrum part, which is very important. Also infrastructure investment, like small cells, rolling back red tape there to enable the investment that can happen. Okay, short spectrum, we already discussed it in the opening, same approach. We all need basically spectrum for wide area coverage. We have the sweet spot spectrum below 1 gigahertz, already a number of bands used for 4G and previous generation, which will be useful. And then this major band, 700 megahertz, very important for Europe to have this reliable coverage, to come to data rates of 10 megabit per second, more or less universal coverage, and then, of course, a lot of work to be done to make this available in a good coverage, as good as possible. Then the mid-bands, as was discussed this morning in the opening already, have the chance to have a bigger chunk in the 3.6 megahertz part from 3.4 to 3.8 is the first step. And there we have the opportunity to have, if we go for the exclusive licenses, like 4 times 100 megahertz, and also maybe also possibilities for verticals to come in here. And so very important band, this mid-band, because you can have very high speeds, very high capacity, but still manageable cell sizes compared to higher bands. This is the new frontier, and we are also very much looking at that. Of course, we have one of the pioneer bands is the 26 gigahertz band next to the 28. And there we are, of course, looking at synergies also at a global level, which is important. Here we can really have ambitious data rates, probably not so much wide area deployment. We will see what is possible in urban areas, but certainly for hotspots, fixed wireless access, and other use cases, this will be a very attractive band. Good. That's the part, like saying, dedicating the bands for the use, which is important. We have to identify them. We have to look ahead. I agree with the FCC also to look ahead of these pioneer bands for the next WRC and the upcoming ones. But then we also have the challenge, especially in Europe, where we have 28 member states all being responsible for spectrum assignment, to bring this spectrum consistently to the market and to have scale. And that's why we proposed a new telecom law, which goes beyond spectrum, but it has an important element for 5G, the spectrum pillar. And actually, the idea is here to have conditions throughout Europe that are more or less consistent, to have also timing, as discussed this morning. The time plan is clear, the calendars for legal certainty. So starting point is to define some principles, so we don't talk about full harmonization of spectrum management in Europe, but we give some principles and criteria for the regulator, a reference framework for rights of use and for the assignment processes. Based on that, then, very important is to have a peer review mechanism, so when a member state goes for a spectrum auction, other member states can comment, can look at the consistency, and by that, hopefully, achieve some consistency. The time calendar is already said. We have in Europe not the approach that we have usually unlimited licenses, except for the UK. So the challenge here is to have reasonably long licenses, to have this legal certainty for investment incentives. So here we're talking about 20 years now, and if we align these calendars, this would already be a good step forward. I already mentioned it, small cells deployment. So how can we define a category of cells where the authorization can be done easier, and then accelerate the densification that we need for 5G. So these are provisions that are more or less agreed, still have to be adopted formally, expected for summer, but then hopefully we can go ahead with the implementation of this law in the member states. I have to accelerate a bit, half a minute still left. So from the public sector to the private sector, the main preparation now, as we all know, is to move ahead with trials, to look at the ecosystem, to develop the business models that we need for the different vertical use cases. We have several phases in the PPP and the research program that you know from phase 1, started in 2015, core technologies, to proof of concept in the phase 2, now moving into this very important phase 3, where we have the verification platforms now launched, where we will have, which will be a basis for vertical trials, starting with connected automated driving. There will be a 50 million call that is soon launched, and then a broader call for verticals coming up. Just 10 seconds, if I can overshoot the timing, just to announce the European 5G Observatory. So we have to watch very closely the progress in Europe, especially because we have this fragmented landscape of many member states doing things here. So you might have a look, the link is there, looking at main market developments, commercial trials, strategies, what happens in the member states, spectrum, and then you will see comprehensive reports coming up after summer where you can look at the progress from European and also global perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Wen Ku, Director General, Department of Information and Communication Development, MIIT, China.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, dear friend, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Now, it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to share the progress of 5G in China. I came from the Ministry Information Telecommunication Development Department. I'm the Director General of the department. And I think many the colleague already mentioned, mobile is very important to play the role in the information society. And since the first generation, every 10 years we have new generation. Now we have the 5th generation for the mobile. And the mobile telecommunication service play a very important role for the information society. Now, more and more applications working on the mobile terminal, especially in China. The people live in the mobile phone for not only for the telecommunication, but also for the life, news, e-payment, and many, many things. I think that it shows in the screen. And 5G has a big challenge. First, in the technology. Everybody knows from first generation to the second generation, third generation, the fourth generation, each generation have the new technology. But in the 5th generation of the mobile, it's quite, from the radio technology point of view, it's quite difficult to find a new technology. We just use the combination of different technology to gain the efficiency of the spectrum. And also, in the frequency, it's also difficulty, as mentioned this morning, but from the FCC official. It's quite difficult to find the big block of the spectrum to load the information. So that is also the challenge from the radio spectrum. And another challenge is application. And from the first generation to the fourth generation, it looks like no big difference. All the terminal connect to the people. But now, from moment now, the application for the 5G is connect to the society. So it's quite difficult for the mobile terminal connect to the society. That is a big challenge for the mobile people. We are very happy to see through our hard work globally, we reached one standard. That is the dream for the mobile people. This morning, I met the old friend from Japan, Sato, and we working together for the 2 decades for the mobile. And our dream is to reach one standard in the world, but now we got it. One world, one standard. So this year is a very important year for the mobile standard. In the end of next month, we hope we have the U.S.A. standards from the 3GPP. That is the real one standard, mobile standard in the world. In China, from our experience, especially in the 3G period and the 4G period, the trial is quite important. And especially in the 5G, in the mobile, this system is combined from the network equipment, chipset for terminal application, and the instrument, and the test instrument for the coverage. So that is the ecosystem. This ecosystem needs the cooperation between the different vendors, the vendor from the equipment manufacturer, chipset, and so on. So that is the interconnection, interoperability is quite important. It took a long time for the different operator to make the equipment mature. So in China, we conduct a trial. This trial participated by the different company. That is a domestic company and also very important from the international company, especially Ericsson, Nokia, Qualcomm, and also the operator, China Telecom, China Unicom, and also the international operator like the Japan operator, Docomo, KDDI, and so on. So this trial environment is quite important to accelerate the equipment development and also to get more experience in the future deployment of the 5G network. And the spectrum is quite important. This morning, a lot of the words is about the spectrum. And by the time being, the spectrum more and more closed in the different country. This slide is the spectrum, as we know, is more closed from the different country. Application is quite important. And we found the big difficulty, the big challenge for us is not 5G itself, because 5G have the specification, they worked together, reached in the 3GPP. But that is a limited task. We can reach it. Unlimited task is application. It's quite difficult. We found even now, it's quite difficult. We found what is 5G can do and 4G cannot do. That is the challenge for us. That is the value of the 5G. So we try to face this challenge. We in China, we ask for the applications from the society in China. This is in the progress. And I would like to use the last words for me, for the last slide for my presentation. This slide is, we would like to say standard should be one standard, world connected. And also the research is quite important. And frequency is the base for the deployment of the network. And the big challenge is application, and vertical cooperation is needed in the future for the 5G. And also international cooperation is very important for our ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to present is Mr. Donald Stockdale, Bureau Chief, Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Federal Communications Commission, United States of America.
Thank you, Chris. Today, what I would like to do is to focus on a common challenge that telecom regulators worldwide face as they try to facilitate the deployment of 5G and other advanced wireless technologies. And while we face a number of common challenges, it is my view that the biggest one is finding more spectrum to make available. And we must find more spectrum in large contiguous bands at low, mid, and high band if we are to meet the increasing demands for wireless services. Now, spectrum is a scarce resource, and as many of you know, in the U.S., the majority of this radio spectrum has already been allocated and assigned for specific uses and services. And I believe that is true for many other nations as well. So the question then becomes, how can we make more spectrum available for flexible use when much of it is already assigned for existing uses? And in my view, basically to accomplish this, we must adopt one or more of three approaches. They are repurposing government spectrum, which in the United States can only be done with legislative directive. Second, sharing of spectrum between government and private users. And third, reallocating spectrum among private users or requiring sharing of spectrum among private users. So let's start with repurposing government spectrum. Now, as many of you know, in the United States, the FCC has licensing authority for non-federal spectrum, while the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA, controls federal authorizations. The FCC and the NTIA have had and continue to have a close and productive partnership, and we have worked hard together to make government spectrum available for commercial use. Now, in previous years, the FCC and NTIA reallocated 45 megahertz of spectrum in the AWS-1 band for commercial use, and later 40 megahertz of spectrum in the AWS-3 band for the same purpose. More recently, the Commission and the NTIA have agreed to make 100 megahertz of spectrum, of mid-band spectrum available, specifically in the 3.5 gigahertz band, available for commercial use. And we have collaborated to make the 37 gigahertz band available for shared commercial and federal use. In addition, NTIA Administrator David Rettel recently announced that the 3450 to 3550 megahertz band, which is directly below the existing 3.5 gigahertz band, is the next federal government band for detailed feasibility study for potential repurposing. That effort, if successful, would strengthen the 3.5 gigahertz band as a pioneer band for 5G. Now, I should also mention that in addition to making several federal bands available for flexible commercial use, the FCC has also made available several non-federal millimeter wave bands available, including the 24, 28, and 47 gigahertz bands. And we have scheduled an auction for the 28 gigahertz band to begin in November, followed immediately by an auction of the 24 gigahertz band. Okay, second is sharing of federal and non-federal bands. Sometimes we have found that it is impractical to have the federal incumbents relocate. In such cases, we found ways to enable multiple parties to share spectrum in a manner that minimizes interference and maximizes use. To enable federal and non-federal sharing in the 3.5 gigahertz band, we've had to develop innovative sharing mechanisms to protect federal and non-federal incumbents while giving commercial users access to the band. Specifically, we are developing a dynamic sharing mechanism that employs spectrum access systems, or SASs, and environmental sensing capabilities, or ESCs, to ensure that lower priority commercial users will shut down when higher priority federal users are operating in a particular area. Finally, transitioning non-governmental users and repurposing spectrum. For bands that are used by private incumbents for specific uses and services, we've looked to develop innovative, efficient mechanisms for inducing these incumbents to give up their spectrum or relocate in favor of more valuable uses. While a number of different approaches have been adopted, and perhaps we can discuss those in the Q&A section, I think one of the most promising approaches is one that the Commission adopted in the recently concluded broadcast incentive auction. The incentive auction involved the use of a two-sided auction to repurpose 84 megahertz of spectrum from broadcast television to flexible use. I'm proud to say that just a month ago, the Commission won the 2018 Franz Edelman Award for achievement in advanced analytics, operations research, and management science for its groundbreaking work on the incentive auction. Now, I'm nearly out of time, so let me just mention two other efforts or aspects of the Commission's efforts to further 5G deployment. First, we're adopting policies to facilitate infrastructure deployment, and including both wireline and wireless infrastructure. This is particularly important given that many of the newest technologies involve small cell architectures. Second, we're continuing to provide universal service support for broadband deployment in areas where broadband otherwise would be uneconomic. And in particular, we are in the process of designing and implementing the Mobility Fund Phase 2 auction, which will distribute support for mobile broadband in high-cost areas. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Our next speaker is Mr. Gaku Nakazato, Director of New Generation Mobile Communications Office, Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, Japan.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gaku Nakazato from MIC Japan. I'm going to talk about Japanese 5G-related situation. The slide summarizes Japanese 5G roadmap toward 2020 and towards. We have designed three main streams to be carried out in parallel. The first one is, of course, research and development and field trials. The second one is international collaboration and cooperation, including standardization. And the last one, but not least, actually most expected for the ministry, is the rule-making process on 5G spectrum and technological specifications. Also, 5GMF, 5G Promotion Group in Japan, has been supporting 5G-related activities by private sectors aggressively. We are expecting some good interactions among them so that we could make the first version of 5G services available around the spring of 2020, just before Tokyo Olympic Games. About 5G field trials, as I mentioned, in the last 5G global event in Seoul, we started totally 6 projects in fiscal year 2017. Sorry about the small characters, but the table summarizes the project based on targeted technology, environments, user mobility, frequency, and so on. Each project has been successfully finished in the first year. We are preparing for the second year, including setting more difficult target and involving other industries and new rural areas. I will be able to introduce the new project in detail, maybe at the next Global 5G event in Brazil. Now, please watch the short video on the screen, which shows the scenes from the first year trial project. Please.
Maybe we don't have 5G yet.
Is it the next? Can you hit the next slide or not?
We need low latencies.
Hello.
Can you play that? No?
Could you cue it up? Thank you.
This is telemedicine. This is car on the train. This is remote control of a construction machine. This is stadium solution. This is truck tuning. It's kind of IoT solution using 5G. Thank you very much. Next, I'm going to talk about the spectrum issue. In Japan, as you might have known, 3.6 to 4.2 gigahertz and 4.4 to 4.9 gigahertz are the candidate band for sub-6, which is below sub-6 gigahertz. In addition to that, 27.5 to 29.5 gigahertz is the candidate frequency band for the above 6 gigahertz band. We are planning to allocate the frequency around the end of fiscal year 2018, that is around the end of March 2019. Before allocation on schedule, we have to fix technical condition by end of this summer. The slide shows the current situation of sharing studies around the candidate band. About sub-6 band, there are radio stations for fixed satellite downlink, radio altimeter, fixed wireless access system, and public services, and so on. About above 6 gigahertz band, there are radio stations for radio astronomy, radar, fixed wireless, fixed satellite, uplink, and amateur. As my last slide, I'd like to mention how to license millimeter wave for 5G. Millimeter wave band, which is 28 gigahertz in Japan, is expected for high speed and large capacity data communication, as you know. However, due to its high strength advancing capacity, advancing property, it will be difficult to extend area coverage by this band itself. So MIC puts on mobile operators obligation so far to achieve certain coverage ratio when licensing in terms of percentage of population in a certain period, such as 5 years or 10 years. In millimeter wave band case, it might be difficult to maintain such obligation, and it will be necessary to adopt new license criteria or some other solutions. I know some countries, some regulators are interested in Japanese way of licensing, so I would be very happy to discuss this matter and exchange views. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much for the kind attention.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Juseop Sim, Deputy Director, ICT and Broadcast Policy Division, Ministry of Science and ICT in Korea.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. I am Juseop Sim, MSIT from Korea. I would like to talk about the 5G status in Korea. This slide outlines the entire presentation. Korea is preparing for the world's first country to commercialize 5G in March 2019. I would like to highlight 4 key factors on Korea's policy in time order. First of all, a large-scale 5G service was demonstrated at the Pyeongchang Olympic Games in February 2018. Second, in June 2018, we are planning to hold an auction of frequencies to establish 5G network. Third, we are pushing for co-building and co-using of essential facilities to reduce investment burden for operators on 5G infrastructure. Lastly, we are planning to push ahead with an empirical project that will use 5G in manufacturing and transportation fields from second half of 2018. Let's see the specific progress in next slide. Next, let me explain Korea's spectrum auction plan for the deployment of 5G network. The specific goals and directions are as follows. For the world's first commercialization, the government will speed up the supply of spectrum. The government provides 3.5 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz bands simultaneously to build world-class infrastructure. We are going to provide 280 megahertz bandwidth in the 3.5 gigahertz band and 2,400 bandwidth in the 28 gigahertz band. And the government creates a fair competitive environment between the operators. Let's take a closer look at the next slide. Let me introduce a major schedule for 5G spectrum auctions. We have improved the standard for determining the price of spectrum auctions by every 2018. In May 2018, spectrum auction method was finalized and announced. Then a frequency auction will be held in June 2018. In addition, the technical regulations for equipment and terminals will be prepared by June 2018. The following is the policy for co-deployment and co-utilizations of required facilities. There are three main directions for joint utilizations and joint deployment. First, we simplify the relevant regulations and expanded the number of service providers subject to obligation from only KT to others. Second, we are planning to impose obligation on local governments and utility operators to provide their facilities or resources, such as street lights, in-building space, and etc. For example, in deploying 5G network, wireless operators can install a base station on the street light. Finally, to promote a joint deployment of new physical infrastructure, Korea has expanded range of facilities and target areas where co-building are applied. For example, previously, only wire facilities were applicable, but now mobile communication facilities are added as well. In order to this plan, the Korean government has held many consultations with stakeholders since December 2017, and finally made an agreement in April 2018. As of now, proceed amendment of notifications related to the plan. At the end of presentation, following is the project that applies 5G to vertical industries. The Korean government is planning to push ahead with a project that will invest $80 million by year 2020. There are 5 fields of project: media, smart factory, autonomous vehicles, smart city, and public safety. The services in the project can be divided into the 2019 year target service and 2022 year target service. The 2019 year target service during the project period will focus on extending the services, while 2022 year target service will focus on verifying the service model. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mr. José Gustavo Gontijo, Director, Department of Science, Technology, and Digital Innovation, MCTIC in Brazil.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. So, it's good afternoon. Oh, good morning. In Brazil, it's afternoon, so this is the jet lag issue. Well, in Brazil, we are working very hard. We have some projects with 2 or 3 of these partners here in the table. And what we have is we have an ecosystem that we have the ministry working the national digital strategy that have been published 2 months ago. The telecom policies. We have the national regulator, that's Anatel, with the regulatory issues and the spectrum management, such as FCC. And we have also the 5G Brazil project. That's the industry and the telco. They work together with a framework where Professor Brito is the general secretariat for that. And you have also the society that demands a lot of throughput and applications. And one thing that we have is the 5G address the throughput, the resilience, the latency, and the multiple users. But at the end of the day, for Brazil, we have an issue that's the coverage. We know that the 4G, the 3G has a lot of coverage, the low spectrum bands also. But as you know, and the history showed that to us, the demand of band and the demand of coverage increased very high. So you have the video streaming, you have the IoT application, you have too many things happening, and so fast that at the end of the day, the government cannot regulate as fast as he have to do. So what he do is thinking about the digital strategy, seeking to offer a broad diagnosis of the challenges, choosing verticals to expand the access to the population, and not only the mobile. I guess the FCC colleague explained very well that the challenges are completely different from now to the future. And then looking if the 5G will solve everything. Probably in the first beginning, will not. For instance, the Korea will start to use the 5G in March commercially, but it's only the standalone and the core and the new releases. How will you address the challenges with the technology that are coming to the market? We here in this room, we are thinking that, okay, it can be this, it can be that, but the real demand of the infrastructure will only appear when the solutions appear. And most of the solutions don't appear yet. So how you address that? So for the next years, for the next releases, we urge to think how we can address the whole market. In Brazil, in Europe, in the U.S., we have regions that we don't have coverage. We don't have the necessary throughput to provide a good quality services. Looking to that, Brazil starts to study some spectrum bands. So we have the 1.5, 2.3, 3.5. The first one probably will be the 3.5. We have an issue because you have the broadcast satellite system in Brazil. So we are doing the refarming, pushing them to a side of the band to get the most large continuous band for that. We are also thinking about the 24, 27 band and 37 and 43. Looking how we can identify these tracks. We have an issue in Brazil. I guess in Europe we have the same issue. That is the satellites in Ka band that are working. So how we can manage that? Is it possible the collocation? But there are some parameters that we are still setting that. So we have confidence that will happen, but we have to take caution a little bit to avoid some noise with the satellite guys. So that's what we are doing. And the 66 and the 86 probably will be unlicensed systems. It's a very short range, and with a very smart way of regulation, it can be addressed. But this not solve what we really think for the future. You look this picture of Brazil, these red areas, we don't have at least one node B. We don't have herbs on those municipalities. If you take a picture for 3G and 4G view, this can be worse because we have 2G in many municipalities. The base station, but they don't have broadband, mobile broadband on those regions. So if you look this, and if you, I'm confident that if you look for the countries that have large areas, they will have the same issue. And if you don't think as government how to state that the next release, I agree that the first ones we need to push it to get early wins, but the next release must have some kind of thinking to reach these areas, such as using dynamic sharing, dynamic usage of the spectrum in Brazil. The main population are in the shore, and in the middle of the country, the spectrum is allocated for the telcos, but the usage is very low. How you can use this dynamic usage of the spectrum, using white space, including the broadcasting spectrum that have been allocated, and how we can do that? So this is a challenge. Maybe if we agree here and in the standardization forums, to think how we can use this in those areas. Then we can have a large band in low frequency and achieve this goal. So this is one thing. This is for Brazil. Probably Professor Brito and Professor Mendes will show to you in their participation how we can think to address this issue. We know that the technological guys are working very well for the urban areas, for the high density areas. The possibilities are huge, but we cannot move forward and let the other part of the population, of the citizens behind. We have to move everyone forward. So this is our goal. Thank you.
Okay, we want to open it up to audience questions, but I also have some quick, just real quick questions to get it flowing here. So we all talk about spectrum being the key ingredient for 5G. Can we just go down the line and when do you think your region or country is going to be put, I saw some on the slides already, but I just want to clarify for everyone. When do you think your region or country will be putting out spectrum that will be used for 5G? So, Peter.
Yeah, with pleasure. So, indeed, we have the challenge in Europe to get these calendars aligned, as I showed you in the slide. A simple answer is end of 2020. Now we have proposed in the law as a deadline for all member states to actually make the spectrum available. That doesn't mean the auction can take before, but really to be used by the private sector from end of 2020 onwards. There's a possibility of derogation. There might be some challenges of clearing bands where it's particularly difficult, but that's the target for the first 3 pioneer bands that I showed.
When do you think spectrum will be available for 5G in your country?
Yeah, in the frequency band, we have the different band for the 3.4, 3.5 and 4.9 already planned for the 5G, but not give to the specific operator. And that means in China, 3.5 and 4.9 is the 5G working spectrum.
So so this year then, you're saying?
Already last year. Already last year designed.
Oh, perfect.
But not give to the specific operator.
Okay.
Yeah, that means the 5G working in this area.
Okay.
And also for the high band is still under investigation. Will be released soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the U.S., we already have spectrum that is available for 5G. The broadcast incentive auction to which I referred made available spectrum, the 600 megahertz band, and I believe that Sprint is already planning to deploy 5G in that. We have the 3.5 gigahertz band, where we're introducing an innovative dynamic sharing mechanism where we hope to have commercial operations begin by the end of 2018. And then we have licensees in 28 and 39 gigahertz that are also planning to deploy this year. So in addition, of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, we're trying to make other bands available, which we will be auctioning off.
So low, mid, and high band already available in the United States, and no actually exclusivity as far as like saying that this has to be 2G, 3G, or 4G, or 5G on any of them.
No, flexible use.
Flexible use, yes.
In Japan, 3.7 gigahertz, 4.5 gigahertz, and 28 gigahertz may be allocated March next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
In Korea, after the spectrum auction, the Korean operators can use the 5G spectrum. We expected the time is the end of 2018.
Thank you.
In Brazil, we have a similar approach as U.S. for the the low frequencies, because we have auction the 700, the 2.5, and the other ones, and you are technological neutral. So if they want to use, they will use, but probably they will only use when the standardization are completely fulfilled in the ITU. That's how it works. The 3.5 probably we will next year. And the other ones, we have this satellite challenging, but we believe that we will solve it up to next year also.
So I want to open it up for any questions from the audience. If you just raise your hand, we'll definitely get to it. Okay. And I have a question for Mr. Nakazato. One thing that we mentioned in our emails was about the idea of the mobile operators in 5G having to play nicely with the satellite industry, and the satellite industry having to play nicely with the mobile operators. What is your idea behind how that can happen? Because we see that probably something that's going to be an issue in many parts of the world. As what is your viewpoint on that?
Based on our initial studies, it's going to be difficult to coexist in the same frequency band for satellite and mobile. So maybe we're going to separate frequency band. Yeah.
Okay. And then next question for Brazil would be, you mentioned geography as an issue. What's the solution? Lower bands being utilized, or incentives from the government to cover rural band? What is your outlook as far as how do you get rural areas covered when it comes to 5G?
In the auctions from Anatel, usually we do the filet and the bone approach, but also we have as a proposal to use the low frequency, we have the 450, very tight band, but if you go to these regions, there are many spectrum that are located but are not used. So if you think about dynamic usage, think about using white space. Think about to use. But you also has the filters expensive filters issue. But you have to use another modulation such as GeoFDM that everyone knows. This approach can solve many issues, but it cannot be only a Brazil solution. Mm-hmm. That's why we are every time in all the forums that we participate in. Talking about that, we have to have a world approach to use this kind of issue. Otherwise, we will have only the Brazil solution, and it's too expensive to implement only in Brazil. We have to do this worldwide.
Right. Yeah. We have a question over here. If we get a mic. If you could say your name and where you're from.
My name is Jama. I'm from Zen Group, which is located in the Middle East. What I'm seeing, there's different type of spectrum on the 5G, the low and the higher. But do we align with the vendor? Because the vendor, they need to develop their hardware in terms of those frequencies. Plus, what I understood that most of vendors, they are not doing massive MIMO on the lower frequency. So is there any alignment with the vendor regarding this lower frequency on the massive?
I was having a hard time hearing. Did anyone get?
You want to repeat it again?
Yeah.
What I'm saying, what I'm hearing, there's different type of frequencies on the 5G, correct? So my question is, do we align with the vendor regarding to develop their hardware in terms of this different type of frequencies on the 5G?
Okay, I think we can answer that.
One other question is, knowing that most of the vendors, they are not doing the massive MIMO on the lower band. Mm-hmm. So what I'm seeing, some of them, they are going lower band with the 5G, which is, there is no massive MIMO on the 5G.
So the first question would be about the hardware vendors and the frequencies.
Yeah. So I think the carriers and the vendors are working both with international standard setting agencies to develop equipment. One of the things that I think 5G makes clear is that to deploy it, we're going to need spectrum from a bunch of different ranges. That increases the interest in international harmonization, but as I think all of us have sort of recognized, we have different constraints in our own country, so complete harmonization is unlikely. one of the things that's making things a promising technological development is the idea of tuning ranges. So, for example, in the case of the U.S., we're focusing on making 28 gigahertz available, but this is within a broader tuning range of 26 to 28. Similar in the U.S., we're thinking about making 30 to 739 available for flexible use, and that's also within a broader tuning range of, I think, 30 to 7 to 43. So I think the vendors, the carriers, and the regulators are all trying to cooperate to develop compatible technology.
Yeah, you can pretty much be assured if you look at all the operators that are speaking today at today's conference, they're talking about their 5G plans, that they are working hand in hand with their partners that are the vendors, even from both the infrastructure side and the device side. And I think you'll hear that throughout today's presentations. I think your other question was on MIMO, correct? Yeah, lower frequencies?
On the lower band, yes, low frequency.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think you'll hear, I mean, we already seen some major MIMO announcements here in the United States, and one was from Sprint at their 2.5. And they'll be
this is the high
today.
band. I'm talking about the
and
low.
then the high bands, and then the low bands. I know there's a lot of research and development being worked on, depending on how low you go. So, and let's just bring that up as one last question, because we are going to run out of time here. And anyone can answer. How important is international harmonization? I mean, we have WARC for spectrum. Excuse me. We're coming up to WARC 19. Everyone's going to be at the table at WARC, but there'll be many, many more. How important is it going to be to get your hands around internationally harmonized spectrum, or at least spectrum in the tuning ranges that you talked about? Is there a way to go it alone, or is it still kind of high in the priority list? Anyone want to answer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that adds nicely to the question that was asked, and I fully agree with Donald. What we have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, the devices, there are some limitations in time, at least in the next years, how many interfaces you could support. So it's not that we can put 20 5G bands in one device now in the next year. So there's we have to be some reasonable on that side. We need the scale. So I think 5G, in terms of standard and spectrum, we continue to work together, and needs to be a global solution as far as possible. And then we have realities. We have incumbent use. We have to see, of course, which directions we are going, and then build on the synergies that are possible. And I think even if we say, okay, some regions go in two different paths, they always have in mind, and this leads to the tuning range potentials, how you can combine things so that you have global roaming, that you have economies of scale.
Okay. Anyone else want to add? Yeah, go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
We believe the harmonization is the unique solution, the only solution that we can use, because when you think about that, will not be the mobile phone, will be a car that will be manufactured in Mexico and sell it to Europe, or a car in Japan that will sell in Brazil, a connected car. It's not harmonized. It don't make sense. Yeah. It would be a freak issue. And as I explained it, in a specific case for the coverage, it must be a worldwide solution. Mm-hmm. Probably each country has an issue. It can be addressed for the country, but it's not feasible. It not makes sense to do this. If you go to the 2G, 3G, if you look the spectrum allocation for each country, for each region, it was very non-harmonized in the past, and as the society and the government's interactions evaluate, it converged. So I believe probably will not be 100% because we have the legacy, but we are seeking to do that. So.
Mm-hmm. Final word done? Or no, sorry, go ahead.
To my ministry, that issue is still in the high priority issue. And it's very important for the advancing countries like us, but also the other countries like developing countries.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They gonna introduce 5G sometime in 2020s. Mm-hmm. Yes, so it's very still important.
Well, that's going to wrap up our time. I know there's a few more questions, and hopefully our panelists will stick around a little bit for the day. But I will welcome and thank you